Guys, week 12, woohoo! I know it's going by so fast. So I want to talk a little bit about the next quiz. I had the quiz ready on Monday, but then I decided I want to tweak it just a little bit. So I ended up working on it, and then I got it ready yesterday. So now it is available to take, quiz 3. This will cover chapters 7, 8, and 9. So what I want to do for the news this week is just go over a little bit of certain areas within each of the chapters. That way you can kind of focus in on your readings and be prepared for the quiz. Okay, we're chapter 7. Chapter 7 has several different topics in psychology. Very, very important topics, by the way. This deals with cognition. And this is an area where people actually specialize. Some people get their PhDs in cognitive psychology. And some of the areas that individuals research and study deal with memory. We've already talked about memory. Deal with thinking, reasoning, communication, language. You can see that this is just a huge field in cognitive psychology. What I want you guys to specialize in this area is intelligence. That is very, very important, because when you think about, entering college and deciding what you want to do and where you want to go, intelligence is part of that process. You have to sit back and think, okay, what am I getting? What classes am I just understanding, and what other areas am I struggling in? So in a way, intelligence is really tested when you enter, this world of college and your academic journey. So focus in on intelligence within that, and within your readings within that chapter. So for the quiz, make sure you understand what we in the United States define as intelligence. We have a lot of intelligence inventories out there. Some of you may have taken an intelligence inventory when you were in primary school. Usually about 3rd, 4th grade, we start to see, kids that may be excelling. And so we can test them in particular areas. So how do we in the United States define intelligence? So just make sure you have that down. What is important about understanding intelligence and how we kind of measure intelligence is by the assessment itself. Now, in psychology, in my field, we are trained to give inventories. We're trained to give psychological tests. So for me, even in clinical and counseling, not only am I trained to do depression inventories, anxiety inventories, all the inventories that deal with mental conditions, but also intelligence inventories. Because you have to think about it in the different fields. And again, I'll use myself as an example. So even though I'm in clinical and counseling psychology, I still need to know the intellectual level of a patient that I might be working with, because that may decide how I put together a treatment plan, how that patient's going to progress in treatment. So intelligence is just very, very important. And I know there's so many intelligence IQ tests that are out there. I have students that tell me about that all the time, that there's many intelligence tests. They're testing your IQ. But what I want you to know is validity and reliability. How valid is that measurement? That is so important. Is it measuring what it's supposed to measure? So I know some of you have taken the ACT and the SAT, and when you think about those types of standardized tests, are they measuring what they're supposed to be measuring? Content validity. Is the test reliable? I need you to know reliability. Is it a reliable test? If I come up with an inventory, I don't know, say test anxiety, and I want to know if my inventory is reliable, I would give it to several classes, and then I would look at the test scores. Am I getting somewhat around the same test scores? If I had test scores like all over the place, that would indicate to me that it's not a reliable test. So make sure you know validity and reliability. Also, what is our IQ quotient? IQ is mental age divided by chronological age times 100. Now, I know many of you have heard of the bell curve, and that's kind of how we place our intelligence. When the Department of Education was forming in the United States, they asked the question, what is average intelligence? What does that mean, score of average intelligence? Because when you're putting together curriculum and instruction, that's very, very important. So make sure you know the IQ quotient. And then what determines someone who's gifted and someone who's intellectually disabled? So make sure you have that down as well. There are some other contemporary theorists. We have Sternberg. He has 3 areas, creativity, practical, intelligence and analytical intelligence, but one that's very important is Gardner, and Gardner has 9 intelligence. So make sure that you have that in your readings. Okay, so that's what I want you to know for that part of the quiz. Second part of the quiz, or the next chapter, is development. Now, developmental psychology, huge. In fact, we teach a course here at the college. Some of you may have the course now, or you may need it, and that's human growth and development. Human growth and development, developmental psychologists study the entire lifespan of humans. Individuals actually get their PhDs in developmental psychology, and most of all of the big theorists in psychology, everyone that's known down from Freud to Piaget to Erikson, all had a theory about how humans develop. Very important. It doesn't matter, and I think I've mentioned this before, it doesn't matter what field you're in, even in my field, we have to know how a human develops, each stage of development. Because, for clinical psychology, we have certain onsets of disorders. And so if you're talking schizophrenia, and we have an onset in, late to middle young adult, what is the development that's going on in young adults? So developmental psychologists are very, very important. One of the fathers of developmental psychology, and also the father of cognitive psychology, was Jean Piaget. Just a brilliant man. He out of all the stuff that's out there on him, and what I've read about him, because I had to prepare for my dissertation, I used Vygotsky, and Vygotsky's in your chapter. I used Vygotsky, but I still needed to know everything about Piaget. And what I take away from Piaget, what an amazing observer. He was able to look at the capacity of children and the capacity of the intelligence that we inherit, and how we use that intelligence to interpret the world around us. And if you've ever had conversations with a 4-year-old or a 7-year-old or even a 10-year-old, you know those conversations change as they interact in their world. So Piaget has a cognitive stage theory. I know it's in your chapter. In fact, it's even color-coded, which is really nice. So we have sensory, motor, pre-operational, concrete, and formal. So just go over each of those different stages. And again, just, a brilliant theorist, just an amazing observer. Listen, what a great, he just listened to what was being said and was able to determine how, as we develop, each of those stages change. So know Piaget a little bit. I'm not asking really any questions from the other theorists, mainly from Piaget, and also accommodation and assimilation. Also know parenting styles. We just had a big activity in my human growth class, where they had to find their birth order, get information about their birth order, but I came back in the class and said, well, do you think parenting styles have an effect? Do you think that parents parent a firstborn different than a middle child and a baby? I know some of you are probably thinking that right now. You're probably thinking of your birth order. But we do have different parenting styles, and that is very important to development. We need to know if the parenting has affected your development in some way. Now, we have added more parenting styles. You've heard of the helicopter parenting, and now we're adding more. But what does that tell you about our environment and how our environment changes, and how from generation to generation parenting may continue? How your parents, your grandparents parented your parents, and how your parents parented you. Are there changes? Do generations and the environment have an effect on how we parent kids? I asked you that question about, if your child asked you for an iPhone or an iPad or a pad, what would you do? Would it be dependent on age? How much time would you let the child have that type of technology? And that tells us as researchers how development may be changing because of that. So that's what I want you to do for developmental psych and temperaments too. Look at temperaments. Okay, last chapter on the quiz, excuse me, is motivation and emotion. I've always thought of these two theories as my mental health, lecture, because motivation is very important. Motivation, by definition, means to move. What motivates somebody? What moves them? And we know that motivation gives direction. It kind of gives us an idea of the direction that you're taking in your life. And also, how it affects you later on. Goals. goals is part of that motivation. So we look at it from a cognitive perspective, a behavioral perspective, and even a biological perspective. So the two words I need you to know, which are really affected and are the baseline for motivation, is need and drive. And when you think of a need, think of a physiological or psychological deprivation. Something is that you need. Say, for instance, hunger. Hunger would be a deprivation. That would be a need. And then what drives you? Where do you go? Do you go to the kitchen? Do you get in your car? Do you go, do you go to a restaurant? Where do you go? But my emphasis is not just on the physiological needs and drives. What about the psychological part? Because if you're ever going to understand someone who deals with addiction, or someone who has maybe eating disorders like anorexia or bulimia, which I do want you to know, you have to understand the motivation behind it. Having worked with both of those populations, I really had to go back and really kind of search the motivation part of it. When you deal with someone with anorexia who is, underweight, extremely underweight, emaciated, refuses to maintain body weight, has a distorted self-image, intense fear of gaining weight or becoming fat, that's a high motivation. That's that deprivation, and that drive is to abstain from food. So the more we understand how that works, in my field, the better treatment and recovery, and how do we prevent relapse, is a big factor. Bulimia can be hard to distinguish because they pretty much maintain normal body weight. But what can happen is that their need, their deprivation for that food is overwhelming, and they may binge on an enormous amount of food, and then the guilt comes in, and then again it's that motivation, it's that drive to either purge the food or non-purging when they use laxatives. So motivation is such an important theory. And even when we look at addiction, we look at cravings, we look at wants. That's very important. So look at need and drive. We all want to feel this homeostasis, this kind of set point, this feeling of comfort. And so when we look at the need and the drive, what is the homeostasis? Everybody's homeostasis is a little different. You think about temperature. Some people, like it cold. Some people like it hot. Everybody's homeostasis is different, varying on that person's own self point or set point. So we look at from that point. Another theorist I want you to know is Maslow, Abraham Maslow. Huge humanistic, huge force in psychology. But he had a hierarchy of needs. So make sure you check on his pyramid from, basic physiological needs to safety, to belonging, to self-esteem, to self-actualization. And what I always tell students, that what somebody says, the dialogue, what they're saying, you can actually use Maslow. If somebody says, hey, I'm hungry, let's go get something to eat, they're at the lowest tier of the pyramid. If someone says, hey, can we go to this place? I don't feel comfortable in this other place, there's safety. People joining groups, that's belonging. So what a person says, when you really think about it, you can almost put them in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So know that as well. Know the definition of emotion, how we look at emotion, valence of emotion. We determine whether an emotion is pleasant or unpleasant. And remember, 5 emotions: fear, anger, sadness, happy, disgust. And so we not only identify these 5 emotions, primary emotions. Some of you watched that, a movie. I think it was Inside Out. But how we classify it as pleasant or unpleasant. So that's what I want you to know for quiz 3. Very important topics in psychology. Really, really important topics. Can't express enough developmental psychology. We rely on these individuals, these researchers, to tell us in each developmental stage what is happening, and the research is so important for all areas. Motivation is important. Emotion is important, and when you think about intelligence, that's important as well. So if you have any questions, just text me. You can text me anytime, and I hope this kind of mini review will help you out. Bye.